All right. Hey everyone, thank you guys so much for coming to our presentation on the Sandhill Crane Migration. My name is Caitlin and I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before tonight's speakers, there's a few housekeeping things to go over. Your cameras will remain off and you'll be muted throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat or the Q&A section and we'll answer those at some point during and after the presentation. This presentation will be recorded and will be uploaded to Conservation Nebraska's YouTube page within the next couple of weeks. So if you miss any part of today's presentation or would like to revisit or share it with somebody else, you can find it there. And then after the presentation, we'll have a brief survey that I'll send out. It should take less than a minute to complete. And this survey just helps support programming like this one so we can continue to put these on. So we really, really appreciate you taking the time to fill those out. And if anyone in attendance is interested in speaking with a Conservation Nebraska member regarding conservation issues in Nebraska or finding out more about what we do, I'll put our email in the chat. And for tonight's presentation, we welcome Megan and Elsa from the Crane Trust. Megan is the director of the Nature and Visitor Center, overseeing daily operations as well as several educational goals and initiatives. And her focus is on creating opportunities for people to engage with and experience the spring migration and the year-round river and prairie habitats that Crane Trust works to protect. And Elsa is a wildlife biologist overseeing many long-term monitoring projects and assisting with crane surveys. She's experienced in working with terns and plovers, which are both species of concern in Nebraska. And today they're going to talk about the Sandhill Crane Migration and conservation and monitoring for the cranes. So I will let Megan start and take it away.
Awesome, thank you. We are excited to be here today. We're ramping up to March, our big migration season. So getting ready to talk cranes all the time and happy to be here doing it today. So thanks for this opportunity. Elsa, you want to hit the next slide? You already know who we are. Thanks for that great introduction. Elsa, anything else you want to say about you or your role?
Oh, go back. Okay.
Sounds good to go?
Yes. Yeah, sorry, my connection's still a little bit spotty here, but I think we'll be good.
Okay.
Yeah, so did you just introduce yourself?
My name is Megan. I'm Megan. As Caitlin mentioned, I'm the director of the Nature and Visitor Center, and background in education, and have been with Crane Trust about a year, and just love it. So that's me.
Yeah, and also as Caitlin said, my name is Elsa, and I'm a wildlife biologist here, and I work with all the different kinds of wildlife that we have here at the Crane Trust, including our crane species. Here we go. Take it away, Megan.
So just a little bit of background about the Crane Trust, where we're working. The Crane Trust was established in 1978 as a part of a court-appointed settlement. The Gray Rocks Dam was going to be placed on a tributary of the Platte River up in Wyoming, and a lawsuit said you can't do that. It's going to affect the flow of the river downstream, especially for critical wildlife habitat, like where we are in the central Platte River Valley in Nebraska. So that was kind of the history of Crane Trust and why we started protecting this Platte River area in Nebraska for migrating cranes, because it was identified as a key stopover point. But we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on today. So we today manage close to 10,000 acres along the eastern end of the Central Flyway, which we'll have a picture of that in a little bit so you can get a better idea of what that looks like. Have been growing in our mission since the 1978 establishment. In 2012 is when we established our visitor center, acquired our visitor center, have just been growing since then. So that's kind of the background of what where our work has come from to be up to today. And so today the goal is to talk about the Sandhill Crane Migration and the spring migration and some of the work, which is obviously the centerpiece of everything that we do is this migration season. And if it isn't something that you've seen in person, it is really hard to describe what what this migration really is like. Words just don't really capture it. But for the sake of today, we do have some incredible visual storytellers and videographers working at Crane Trust that are helping to kind of do our best to capture the magic of this migration. And so we actually have a short video we're going to play here that will do a better job of kind of getting an initial image of what we're talking about as we talk about this migration than what I could just say with words. So let's see if the audio will play through mine.
Hello, this is Jane Goodall. I first visited Nebraska's Platte River over 20 years ago to witness the annual migration of the Sandhill cranes. It is without doubt one of the most spectacular events in the natural world. Together, we can save the planet, but only if we support those who are working so hard.
All right. So yeah, that was a kind of a little snapshot of some of the footage that we get and kind of give you a little closer look if you haven't been able to come out and see what it's like in March in the Central Platte River Valley. That gives you at least a little bit of an idea, but it really is something that you have to experience to understand kind of the magnitude of the whole ordeal. So we'll just do a quick, you can hear me okay? All right, guys, give me okay, perfect. And we swapped over. So Elsa's computer froze. Thanks for being patient with us while we got that video working. And now I didn't want to mess with my slide controls while the video was playing at risk of dropping it. So I think I can control my slides now, but I'll let you know if that's not working. But we'll just do a quick kind of rundown for people who are interested in the sandhill cranes in particular. Are the most numerous species of crane on the planet. About 80% of the world's population of sandhill cranes, which we now estimate at about 1.25 million birds coming through the Central Flyway in March is usually the peak. So we say the migration season actually runs from Valentine's Day to tax day technically. So we can have birds in as early as February and stay as late as April, but really March is kind of when our peak is. And population numbers of sandhills have been increasing in the past. So that number has gone up in recent years and what the estimate has been. So let's see what all right. And the sandhill crane facts. So they're about 3 to 4 feet tall. They have a wingspan about 5 to 6 feet. So if you think about 1 million birds coming through, they're not tiny birds either. They're pretty good sized and take up a good amount of space in the river valley and in the river while they're here. They range from 6.5 to 14 pounds. They do lay 1 to 2 eggs per year. Usually one of the chicks survive, and they are a bird species that mates for life. So they also live on average 20 years in the wild. So I believe the oldest known crane in the wild was like 38 years old. It was banded like in Florida in the 1980s. And they documented that banded crane in Wisconsin in like 2019. So they can actually live quite a bit longer, but on average, they generally live 20 years or more. So a lot of the birds that come through this area in the migration are birds that have been coming through here for, a while. It's not a new thing. They also are one of the oldest known bird species. So they're documented fossil records of sandhill cranes around that are at least 2 million years old. So they are kind of an amazing adaptive species. As you look at sandhill cranes, so if you have the chance to come out and observe some, one of the things that you'll notice first about sandhill cranes is probably that red crown is what it's called, kind of on their head and their face. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, what's the deal with that? It's actually not feathers. It's made of skin, and it is they use it for communicating, kind of predominantly for communicating. So they have the ability to kind of like contract and expand that red spot, and they will use that kind of in aggression displays. They will point the red at the person or crane that they are trying to intimidate. But it's kind of a fascinating feature and a very distinctive feature on the sandhill cranes. They also are predominantly gray, but they do appear to have rust-colored feathers quite often. So you can see in that picture on this slide, especially that one down in the kind of bottom left standing in the river, you can see the rust color. This is kind of a fascinating feature that we point out to people because the young and adolescent birds have rust-colored feathers as part of their camouflage. So they're born kind of a rusty color, and then they slowly lose those feathers. And so one of the features of an adolescent is those rust-colored feathers. But it's also deceiving because the adults will use mud to paint their feathers actually as part of a camouflage. And a lot of times the like high mineral content in that mud will actually stain their feathers a rust color. So if you're looking for like to tell a juvenile from an adult, the rust colored feathers isn't necessarily the best distinctive feature, because a lot of the adults will appear to have rust colored feathers also. The male and female is another interesting question that we get a lot about sandhill cranes. So a lot of bird species, there is kind of a distinction between the male and female. They'll have different coloring or different features, or different sizes. Sometimes the female will be bigger. With sandhill cranes, it's actually almost impossible to tell just by looking the difference between the male and female. So the best way to tell is really what we call their unison call. So when a mated pair are together and they're calling and speaking, they have distinctive calls. So they actually sound different, but they also look different as they're calling. So the male will really do like a straight. So on the right of this photo example, the one on the right is most likely the male with the straight up and down, kind of a more bugle call. And the female will do kind of more of a chittering, lower kind of call. So that's the best way to tell the difference between the male and female. It's pretty hard to tell just when you're looking. There is an example of a juvenile down here on the left-hand side of the screen too, just to have some reference. You can see there's a little bit of that kind of brown rust coloring, feather still in this one. The best way to tell a juvenile, usually by looking at it, is they often won't have the red head yet. But that rusty kind of patch on the back of the head is the last place that they lose those feathers. So to just be able to look at a crane and tell if it's a juvenile, looking at the back of the head is usually the place I look first. They also have a pretty distinctive call, even now as they're coming through. So the juveniles that are coming through the area right now are almost a year old. They've been through, a breeding season up north, and then they've gone south and are now headed back up north again. And so they are pretty much full grown. You can't really tell too much of a difference between the adults and the juveniles at this point, except that they do have a very high pitched, like sweet little squeaky call still. So you can, if you're listening to a group of cranes, listen for that high pitched juvenile call, because I've actually heard a lot of them this year already. The habitat of sandhill cranes. So they do winter down south in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. And then their breeding grounds are in the north. So spread throughout Canada, Alaska, and even Siberia. They're pretty territorial. So there is, I believe it's like at least a square mile, usually of territory around a nest. They spread out quite a bit when they're up in the north for their breeding grounds. So you can kind of see on this map the migration, their full year travels. There are 2 subspecies of sandhill cranes as well that come through here specifically. One of them is known as the greater sandhill crane, and one of them is known as the lesser sandhill crane. So this is always hard to say. There are more lesser sandhill cranes than greater, but on the eastern edge of the flyway where we are, we get quite a number of the greater sandhill cranes. So there's a pretty good mix out there. So we sit in a good spot to be able to kind of see both and see them compared to one another. They do interbreed. They're a subspecies, so they will interbreed with each other and they travel together for the most part. But there are some kind of distinctive differences. So this photo on this slide, in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that smaller crane. And then compare that to the gray crane that's kind of right in the middle. That is the tallest gray crane on this slide. And you can see not only the size difference between the 2 subspecies, but you can also see a head shape difference. So the greater sandhill cranes, their beak length is going to be pretty noticeably longer. And as a result, that kind of makes their head shape look a lot more streamlined, whereas the lesser sandhill cranes have a little bit more of like a cutie head shape. So that's the best way that I can kind of tell looking in the field, but it isn't necessarily very easy to tell, especially because they're all mixed together. So you can kind of try to keep an eye out. Sometimes you can kind of tell by size, but when they're standing out in the river or standing in cornfields where the ground isn't even, sometimes even just looking at size doesn't really help. But the head shape is a good first look indicator for the subspecies. And I believe while we're on that side, so as you could tell, there were more than just greater and lesser sandhill cranes in that previous photo. There was also a third species of crane that, or well, not a subspecies, the second species of crane that comes through our central flyway as well, known as the whooping crane. And so the whooping cranes are the large white ones. They are the tallest bird in North America. And they are on our logo. If you've seen our Crane Trust logo, they're actually pretty closely tied to our mission statement. While it is, our mission is protecting the Platte River habitat for migrating cranes. It is the whooping crane that is the endangered species and has been on the endangered species list. And so that really gave the original lawsuit kind of the leverage to say, this is critical habitat, and it's critical habitat for a critically endangered species. So whooping cranes, like I said, tallest bird in North America. They stand about 5 feet tall, have a 7 to 8 foot wingspan, range 14 to 17 pounds. Also, similarly, lay 1 to 2 eggs. It's pretty successful if they can have one chick make it to maturity. They also mate for life and have similar, maybe slightly longer lifespans than the sandhill cranes. So it's a fascinating, in the Central Platte River Valley during the migration season, we have the most numerous species of crane, which is the sandhill crane, and the rarest species of crane. They're one of the scarcest birds on the planet. So whooping cranes, there are written accounts of whooping cranes as far back as 1840. But in 1941, they had been hunted essentially to the brink of extinction. They are now protected under the Endangered Species Act and are considered a tentative success story. So while their numbers have obviously recovered a lot since the 1940s when there were less than 20 birds, they are still on the endangered species list and are still obviously, it's a precarious situation and when you have that low of a number of birds. So today at last count, there were 557 in the migratory flock that use the Central Flyway, which is where we sit in Nebraska. It is the last wild migratory population of cranes, of whooping cranes. So we get really, really excited when we see whooping cranes in our area. We had over 100 in the Central Platte River Valley that were documented last spring, in the spring of 2025. Here's a little, so this is a short clip from our virtual camera of some whooping cranes, so you can have a chance to kind of see what they're up to when they're out on the river. So that was kind of a fun little clip of just a morning. We were watching some whooping cranes on the river for the virtual camera. And I think I'm actually going to take this opportunity to plug why our virtual camera is so awesome. So with being able to see whooping cranes anytime that we can is just such an awesome experience, because they are so endangered, because they are elusive. And also because they are endangered, there are rules about how close you can get to them and where you can see them. And part of protecting the habitats that they use is making sure that we don't have swarms of people trying to get close to them and scaring them off. So to be able to see and watch their behavior and their interactions and things like that through such a like high quality video is, I think, one of my favorite things to be able to do, especially our Crane Trust camera in March. Our virtual programs producer, Kylie Warren, runs virtual tours morning and evening, 5 days a week. And will actually be like zooming in. You could tell someone was moving that camera and following the bird. So if there is a whooping crane out there, if there's something out there, she's making sure that we have an awesome view of it. So it's just one of the best and safest ways to be able to see these birds and appreciate them in a level of detail that it's almost impossible to get in person. So that's my virtual program plug. This photo was actually taken in 2021. We had 46 whooping cranes on the river in a single shot, which was it got a lot of attention that day, because again, that was almost twice what the population was at its lowest. To be able to see that many birds in one place is just, yeah, I don't have words for it. It's amazing. So to go a little bit more into detail just about the migration in general. So we talked about there's over 1 million sandhill cranes that come through the central Platte River Valley. We call it the Central Flyway. So there are 4 different flyways in the United States. We sit on the Central Flyway. Again, that's where the most number of sandhill cranes come through and gather. It's also the last wild migratory population of whooping cranes coming through here. You can see the breeding grounds in the north and highlighted in green, and the wintering grounds in the south. And then you can see that star right in the middle. And the hourglass shape sort of really represents why this area is so important on this migration route. It's essentially an 80-mile stretch of the Platte River Valley that has exactly what the cranes need on their migration. We also have millions of snow geese and ducks and birds, all types of other birds that use this same migration route. So the sky is full out there in March. It is filling up right now as we speak. But to go into a little bit about why that hourglass shape exists in that way, why that center of that hourglass is so important. The Platte River is really the centerpiece of that area. This photo kind of represents why the Platte River is such an important stopover, particularly for the cranes. It is that wide, shallow, braided channel that is the exact habitat that cranes are looking for. They prefer to stand in 6 inches of water or less, and they will roost in the river overnight. So when they are here, they usually come here for about 3 weeks on average. And they roost in the river at night, and they will come back and forth between the river during the day. And then they will go out into the fields and the wet meadows around the river and feed during the day, and then return to the river at night, and they will roost in the river overnight. So this is an overhead shot you can see of all those little gray figures down in there are cranes standing in the river. As you can imagine, when we have a huge number of cranes here all at once, the river can start to look a little full, which is an amazing thing to see. So we call it this stopover. We call this staging in the Platte River Valley, that 3-week stopover that I talked about. They are stopping here on their migration to kind of rest and refuel. I'm making sure that, is my audio still good? I feel like as I'm watching my computer screen, it's freezing a little bit.
Your image in the corner sometimes raises a little bit, but I've so far been able to hear everything that you're saying.
Perfect. That's all that matters. Okay, so the staging in the Platte River Valley that happens during that February to April that I talked about during the migration, they are heading north from their wintering grounds, and they stop here for on average 3 weeks, and they rest and refuel and feed. And while they're here, they will gain on average 15 to 20% of their body weight, and that is an important part of their migration in order to make sure that they have what they need to have a successful breeding season once they get up into the north. So without this stopover and rest and the food that they get here, that would endanger the breeding season and the rest of the yearly cycle. So that's why Crane Trust is here, trying to not only protect the river valley where they roost, but also those wet meadows and native prairies. While they're here, the waste corn and other grains in the field are a big part of their diet because those are carbs that they're using to like carb up and gain that weight. But for the rest of the year and historically in their diet, they also eat a lot of invertebrates and plant tubers and other protein sources as well. They're pretty opportunistic feeders. So that kind of gives you an overview of the migration in general and the cranes in particular that are coming through through each migration season. But there is work that is done all year round to make sure that that habitat gets protected. And so I'm going to turn it over to Elsa at this point, but we're also going to check in briefly and make sure that Elsa's computer is functioning. So. Oh, you need me to unmute you, don't you? Because your computer is frozen. Caitlin, do you know how to unmute someone?
I should be able to.
Oh, no.
And while we work on this, there is somebody asked if we know how the Canadian wildfires affected nesting range and habitat this year. So I try to
That's a good question.
Look at that. It's sort of working.
It is working.
Okay.
You. You just
All
holler.
right, so let me,
I will control the slides since I have that
okay.
going, and we'll just keep doing that. But you just tell me what you need.
And let me know if my audio is cutting out or not being great. So
Sounds good. You
we
sound
can
good.
continue. But yeah, otherwise I'm ready to go. So yeah. I guess if you click to the next slide, Megan.
Probably. There we go.
Okay, yeah, there we go. All right, yeah, and apologies everyone. I think there's a little bit of a lag on my side, but I think we will be good to go. So as Megan described, we have a pretty wide-ranging but also focused mission here at the Crane Trust, and there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes beyond crane season that most people don't really see or know about. And one of those things is all of the work that our land management team is in to make the habitat here along the river suitable for the cranes when they come through. That pinch in the hourglass, right? So the prairie and river ecosystems of the Platte River were historically maintained by dynamic processes with river flows and wildfire and grazing. But as human developments altered the landscape, those processes have become something that we as conservationists and land stewards have taken on to mimic those processes ourselves to make the ecosystems healthy for not only the cranes, but also the other species that live here. So that management has many facets to it, including working on cutting back invasive species like red cedar invasive Phragmites and purple loosestrife that choke up our river channels and encroach on our grasslands. We also have a program where we have restored land back to prairie and wetland habitats. So there are seeds that we collect on our prairies and use that seed to restore new prairies, which creates habitat for all sorts of creatures like our pollinators, grassland breeding birds, small mammals, grazers, and everything in between. And in addition to prairie restorations, we also do wetland and slough restoration. And one of our biggest roles is disking work that's done on the Platte River itself on the sandbars. And all of this work is brought about by our land management staff. So big shout out to them. And if we go to the next slide, we can see some of that disking in action with a short little video. So what the disking does is we use a tractor with some machinery to basically take the vegetation off of the sandbars so that the sandbars are free and clear, and that's what the cranes want to find when they come through here on migration. So prescribed fire is another important tool that we use to keep our habitats healthy here. This is an example of one in action where we're burning that pasture there. And the effects of this fire can rejuvenate the ecosystem by knocking back invasive species and decreasing competition for our native grass and forb species. That then creates structural heterogeneity across the landscape. And one other fun thing that we have as part of our land management toolkit is our bison herd. So the Crane Trust started a bison herd around 2013, 2015, and it's here on our property. We, as of this year, have 119 bison in our herd right now, which includes about 70 adults and yearlings. We had 42 calves born in this last year and are expecting typically per year about 40 to 50. We'll see what that number is as we get more into April and June this spring. But the role of our bison herd is to serve as grazers on the landscape. They were here historically, and the way that they graze can create some that heterogeneity in the landscape that provides nesting habitat and foraging habitat for a variety of wildlife species. And one of the important things that we try to do with our herd here is to make sure that it's genetically significant, so and diverse, and with our bison genetics program that we have. Go to the next slide. So in addition to our land management team, we also have a science and research team here at the Crane Trust. And our science team takes a holistic view to studying the wildlife and habitats of the diverse prairie and wetland ecosystems that we have here. And one of the main focuses of our team for that purpose is our long-term monitoring program, which is implemented by our science and research staff, of which I am a part of. So on the next slide, we can talk about the goals of our long-term monitoring program, which is to systematically collect and analyze data to track things like ecological change over time and use this data as well to inform habitat management policy. And to do this, we survey a variety of taxa, including birds that breed here in our prairies and grasslands and woodlands, anurans, so frogs and toads. We also survey bumblebees and butterfly species of concern, which include monarch butterflies and regal fritillaries. We also do vegetation surveys, so what plants we have here in the landscape, small mammals, and also our fish communities. So in addition, then, that's a lot of what the science team does in the summer. But another big component of the science program that's tying it back to cranes is that during crane season, one of our big focuses is doing the crane count. So starting in about mid-February of every year, biologists go up in a small plane to fly over the river a little after sunrise to count the cranes that are roosting on and near the river. So in the river channel, as well as in the meadows adjacent to the river channel. And so we fly an 80-mile stretch, that whole stretch that Megan talked about, from about Chapman to Overton, Nebraska, and we estimate the roost counts from the air. And in the next slide, there's a photo of what it looks like inside the plane. Photo on that previous slide was what it looks like from the plane itself. So here we can see our lead biologist, Bethany, holding up the camera there. So she will estimate the cranes visually from above and then take a photo to use that as a like a correction part in the analysis of the data. And we can go on to the next slide. This is what one of those photos would look like. So it's a zoom in of cranes on the roost on the river, just one little section. And as you can imagine, during crane season, when we have almost 1 million cranes here, there are lots of shots up and down that 80-mile stretch that look a lot like this. Go on to the next slide. So each week of crane season, we do this count, and we've done this for a little over 10, yeah, about 10 years now, now that we're in 2026. And we've been keeping track. And as we keep track of these counts over the weeks and over the years, we can see the different timings of when we have our peak numbers of cranes. And let's see, you can see 2025, this last year in that blue color there, compared to previous years and back to one of our first years of the count in 2016. So we can go to the next slide here, Megan. And this year we also started doing some flights during the fall migration. So we did a few flights this year, mostly in November. And you can see the numbers there from this year. We also have been noticing a new trend of cranes that not only come through here, but have been sticking around over the course of the winter. Sometimes it's a relatively new thing. It was first observed substantially in 2011, 2012, when we had about 5,000 cranes stay for a significant portion of the winter here. Last year, we had about 17,000 that eventually got pushed out by a cold snap. But this year, we had about 35,000, give or take maybe 5,000 on either end, that did stay here with us, largely around our headquarters here at the Crane Trust for the entire winter. And we can go on to the slide where we are now adding to that number of the cranes that hung around. They're getting maybe some more friends coming in from the south. So we had our first flight of 2026 crane count. We had about 50,000, and we are currently around week 2. We had about 115,000 on Monday when we counted, give or take about 1,000 cranes. So for week 3, stay tuned. And yep, that's you. I was just ready for you to switch it over. So I was just saying, stay tuned. We'll count again next week. In addition to the crane count and our long-term monitoring, another project that our science team has started last year is a tracking project. So this is a project where our goal is to capture and deploy GPS trackers on 20 Sandhill cranes. So these are little devices that affix to the crane's leg and send a GPS signal so that we then get this data that shows us exactly where they go. So last year we caught 5 sandhill cranes, and on the map here, each color with those different lines on the map represents one of those 5 cranes and where that crane went after we caught it here last spring. So you can see where we have a crane going to just about every spot across the breeding range for sandhill cranes, even one with that red line going all the way to Siberia. So that one was definitely a lesser sandhill crane, if you remember Megan talking about the subspecies there. So our goal is we do have plans to try and capture more cranes this spring and try to get out the rest of our 20 trackers. And with the idea that with this study, not only will we find out where they're going in general, but we're trying to get an estimate of how far from the river the cranes are traveling to find food these days. So I will turn it back over to Megan.
All right. Thanks, Elsa. So if you are interested in coming to see the Sandhill Crane Migration this year, we recommend coming anytime because like Elsa mentioned, we've got pretty good numbers of cranes picking up already. So there is definitely something to see out there. Our Nature and Visitor Center is located right along Interstate 80 at exit 305. It's a good place to stop in and get the latest info on where are the cranes today, get some driving maps, things like that. If you're interested in doing a riverfront blind tour or another guided tour for a crane experience, that's also a good place to start. Just some stats we do on average estimate we have around 30,000 people come through in March. It's a busy place, so we have visitors from kind of all over the country and all over the world. So come put a pin in our map too if you come visit. Public tour. So if you are interested in coming out to see the cranes, we offer a variety of options. So we have viewing blinds that you can come and either stay overnight as part of our VIP program, or you can book a public blind tour, either sunrise or sunset. We do have driving tours. We have footbridge tours. So just check out our website if you are interested in learning more about how you can come see the cranes in March or anytime in the future. And then I mentioned our virtual camera previously. If you aren't able to make it out to actually see the cranes in person, our virtual camera is an option. So it's one of our exclusive access. If you're a Crane Trust member, memberships do start at $75 for the year. So that will get you access to all of the programming for March, including all of those virtual tours 5 days a week. Those have already started. So coming up this week, there will be virtual tours so you can see what's happening on the river and be able to get some awesome footage of cranes if you're interested in that. What time is it? I think we're going to skip that, Elsa. Is that okay? That was just like a 2-minute video of some of the other species that it might be actually playing on its own. Okay, so I think for given our time, I do want to, so there was that question. I did not answer that question yet, Elsa, about the wildfires affecting the nesting ground of sandhill cranes in Canada. So we'll take questions and just see if anybody's in the chat or has questions about that. But as we review those, yeah. Elsa, do you want to take the nesting ground one?
And then I'll also launch that poll right now too, so people have time to fill that out while we answer questions.
Okay, so there was a question about wildfires affecting the nesting grounds. I'm not exactly sure on specific information about that. I know that there may have been some impacts there, but I would have to check on that. It's a great question.
And somebody asked, what time do they leave the river in the morning to go into the fields? And then what time do they head back to the river?
Yeah, so it can kind of vary with the weather, and correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, but They'll typically leave the river about an hour-ish after sunrise. May take a little bit longer, but then they'll typically head back to the river, maybe around sunset. Yeah.
Yeah, when we one of the common misconceptions about the morning and the morning tours is people think that there's a big lift off, like they all leave the river at the same time in the morning, and that's not necessarily true. They'll usually like just trickle out. So those morning tours, especially if you're viewing the cranes from a blind or a public viewing area in the morning tours are a great time to like see the cranes on the river. There's usually some like fun behaviors as they're on the river. Sometimes they're bathing, which is comical to watch because they're like 3 or 4 foot tall birds, but they like to stand in like 6 inches of water. So they'll usually bathe in like 6 inches of water. So they just look crazy, like rolling around in a little puddle. But it's really fun to watch them kind of wake up on the morning, and you'll see a lot of interactions and stuff like that, but you won't necessarily see a big lift off. Whereas if you come to an evening blind tour, all of the cranes are returning to the river at the same time. So you just really do get like a mass return of the cranes. So like the slide that's up right now, this thank you slide, which is a photo by Jeff Carney, who's one of our artists in our Nature and Visitor Center and also leads some of our photo blind tours. That would be an evening, most likely. It's a lot of birds coming back to the river all at once. So if you want that like grand spectacle of all the birds flying at you, an evening tour is for you. But we take them out, yeah, like Elsa said, sunset, they will start coming in if they're behaving.
Perfect. And then on topic of those tours, do you have to register for the events or tours?
Yep, great question. So we have our tours that we run. So if it's a guided tour, you do have to register. So those are paid tours. We sell tickets to those tours. We have a variety of different options for different price points. So you can come be with a guide and get questions answered if you'd like, or you can level up to the blind tours, or the VIP overnights are all great experiences. For every price point. Those all require registration though. We do have in March a pretty exciting speaker series lineup. So we have some events at our visitor center that are free and you don't have to register. So you can check out our website or our social media for information about those events. So we have people talking about crane behavior if you're interested in that. We have Dr. George Archibald from the International Crane Foundation, who's always one of our amazing speakers. And so that's a fun lineup to check out, and those events are free. And then we have a lot of information in our visitor center about just where should you drive to see the cranes, how can you view them. So if you're not interested in paying for a tour, but just want to go see the cranes and experience the migration, we've got a bunch of helpful tips on how to do that as well. So you can stop in and get some free materials and information that way as well.
Perfect. And then somebody's wondering if there are ADA blinds available.
So that is one of the projects that I'm working on. What I tell people is we have had people go out to our blinds using a wheelchair. Some wheelchairs work well, so others don't. So I usually just, if people have questions, they can call and talk to me at the visitor center. I do know that, yeah, we can talk through options on that. I believe Roe Sanctuary, which is about 30 miles to the west of us. They've done a great and amazing remodel and have similar options for viewing cranes. I think they have a wider variety too of accessible options. So it would be worth exploring from a couple of the different organizations in the area what your options are. But that is definitely something I would love to see happening. So good question.
So we could probably get this last question in. It's around 1 o'clock, so I'll end the poll. But last question here is, what are the hours of the visitor center in March?
In March, we're open 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for showing up and coming down. I'm sure if you have any other questions that you're thinking of, you can always contact Crane Trust, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer. But thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to speaking with us, and everyone at home for joining in. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate all you guys do at Conservation Nebraska. And we were so happy to have a chance to talk about birds. It's our jam.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.